Welcome back, nerds. Todd Gamble, apprentice level beekeeper with the Texas Master Beekeepers program. And today we're going to talk about the Langstroth Hive. It is the most commonly used hive here in the United States, probably the world, but I don't know that for sure. It is the hive used by all commercial beekeepers here in the United States. So this hive was developed by Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth. He was a preacher in the 1800s. He lived from 1810 to 1895. He is often credited with discovering bee space, which is that 3/8 of an inch space that we see between all of our frames and our Langstroth hives. He developed the Langstroth movable frame, and that's really what revolutionized commercial beekeeping, because they could move the frames back and forth without crushing the bees, inspect their hives, and make adjustments. He also developed the idea of stacking boxes vertically on top of each other so that the bees could move from the bottom brood box up into honey supers. Now, I looked at his patent and I noticed that it did advocate the use of a queen excluder. I don't know that he discovered the queen excluder or where he got the idea from, but I do know that in his patent he talks about having a queen excluder so that the bees could move up the workers into the honey supers, but it would keep the queen from moving up into the honey super and laying eggs. Now, Langstroth received a patent for his movable frame and his hive in 1852. He also authored the book The Hive and the Honey Bee, which was published in 1853. Later, Data and Sons took over the production of this book, and they reprinted it several times, and the title has changed somewhat throughout the year. But I think if you have the time, just for a pure historical sense of reason, go back and look at this book. I have been reading some of it, and it's really some pretty interesting information. He has some great observations that he made that are over 100 years old, and they are still viable today, some of the practices that he talked about. In fact, most of them are. But there are a couple of things that we should look at about Dr. Langstroth's invention of the hive. So his original frames were slightly different, and so his hive configuration than what we see today. The original hive was a 12-frame brood box. The frames were 12.5 inches long, 9 to 10 inches deep, so slightly different. Now, over the time of his life, he fought many times to keep his patent and to get royalties, but because the frame was so easily modifiable and the size of the frame could be built in the box, he was never able to receive any royalties from his creation, which is kind of sad. I also want to point out that just because Langstroth was credited with bee space, technically bee space was being used by other apiarists in Europe as early as 1835. So their idea of a gap was 7 to 10 millimeters, which is about the same as 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of bee space. The biggest contribution, of course, to the Langstroth hive was the movable frames and being able to stack the boxes one on top of each other. And as you can tell today, we have the 8-frame and the 10-frame box. The frame sizes are slightly different from the way they were originally created in the patent. So while the Langstroth hive is the Langstroth hive by name, it is not exactly the same hive that Langstroth developed in the 1800s. Having said that, let's take a look at what components make up a Langstroth hive. So the Langstroth hive, as developed by Langstroth, was a series of stackable boxes. There was the larger brood chamber, and he did patent the idea that you would put smaller honey supers on top. They were easily removed by the beekeeper so that you could harvest honey. So his basic hive components today of the modern Langstroth hive contain a hive stand, a bottom board which can be open, solid, or screened. The brood box is usually 1 or 2 deep boxes. We usually use a queen excluder. It can either be made of wood, plastic, or metal inside a wood frame. The honey super is a medium or a shallow box. It should have a wooden inner cover, and it's going to have a telescoping outer cover. Now this configuration is the same whether it's an 8-frame or a 10-frame hive. So this is the Langstroth beehive in a nutshell. Stand, bottom board, brood box, honey super, inner and outer cover. It's a pretty simple design. It works really well. It can be unwieldy when you start stacking multiple brood boxes up when you get really big hives. But that's the whole idea behind it, is that as the hive grows, the colony grows, you can increase the size of the hive by stacking boxes on top of one another. So I'm not going to spend any time really on hive stands. Hive stands are a matter of personal preference. A lot of beekeepers stand up cinder blocks, put a landscape timber between the two, and set their hives on top of those. I'm not a big fan of that. I think it lowers it too close to the ground, especially if you're out in an area, a rural area where skunks and other animals can get up and eat your bees on the landing board. I definitely do not recommend you placing your hives on the ground. Placing your hive really close to the ground, and I see that in a lot of YouTube videos, allows ants and other crawling insects to get inside your hives, and I don't think that is a very good idea. But again, this is personal preference. Put them on whatever kind of stand you want. The basic Langstroth hive was a wooden stand that sat underneath the hive, 3 to 4 inches in height, and then you sat it on top of something else to keep it off the ground. But here we're going to look at primarily bottom boards. So there are 3 types of bottom boards. The solid is the most basic bottom board, and that's what most new beekeeper kits are going to come with. Like its name, it's just a solid board that the hive body sits on top of. The second type is a screened bottom board. Now it has a screen made of hardware cloth that allows debris to fall to the ground. It also allows for ventilation of the hive from underneath. A lot of people like the screened bottom boards, especially here in the southern climates. I'm not a big fan of having just a screened bottom board openly ventilating the hive, because it does not allow the bees to control the ventilation of the hive. It also, during times when there is a nectar flow, or I'm sorry, not a nectar flow, but times of a dearth, that scent of honey gets out there, and it does draw robber bees to your hive. A third type of, well, let's go back to that real quick. The screen bottom board can be set on top of a solid bottom board to make 2 pieces, and then you can set your hive on it so that any debris and things like mites can fall through the screen bottom board onto the solid bottom board, and mites cannot, well, they still can get up. It makes it more difficult for them to get back up into the hive. So then we're going to have the screened bottom board with an IPM tray. Now IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. This is generally a solid bottom board with a screen above it, which has a slot in the back, which allows you to insert a tray into the bottom, onto the bottom board to catch debris. You can spray the tray with oil or like a Pam cooking spray, and this allows the mites to fall down into the tray. They get stuck in the oil, and they can't climb back up through the hive to get back onto the bees. Now, it does allow you to count mites if you use the sticky type boards that fall underneath it, but it's not a good way to check for mites. You really need to do mite washes in order to check for your mite counts in your colonies. But IPM is an important way for us to help manage the mite loads in our colonies and in our hives. So if I actually prefer this type of bottom board, but I know that I don't have this type of bottom board on every one of my hives. I do have a couple smaller hives that I just have a solid bottom board on. Again, hive bottoms are a matter of personal opinion. All right, so once we have our bottom board, next is the hive boxes. And the hive boxes, or brood boxes, will sit on top of your screen bottom board. Like all Langstroth components, the boxes are going to be either an 8-frame box or a 10-frame box. Now keep in mind that you should choose an 8-frame or 10-frame setup at the time that you start your beekeeping journey. It's better if you do it that way. It's better to have one size box because they're not interchangeable. You can't stack an 8-frame brood box on top of a 10-frame brood box because they're different sizes, or vice versa. So I suggest you choose. Do you want an 8-frame box or 10-frame box? Now, a lot of times this decision is going to be made due to whatever your mentor has or what's available in your area. It may be related to your age. Myself, I chose an 8-frame brood box. I wanted smaller frames, smaller boxes, less to lift. For some people, the 10 frame's not a problem. I can tell you, as you get older, having a smaller boxes to have to move is an advantage. But you also have 2 less frames in each brood box, so they are not as productive in theory. So anyway, let's take a look at the deep box. Langstroth Hive box types. There are 3 types. There's the deep, the medium, and the shallow. All of these boxes are 19 7/8 inch in length, but the deep box is called also the brood box is also called the deep. It's 9 5/8 inches tall and uses only deep frames. Now you can put a medium or shallow frame in a deep box, but it is going to leave quite a bit of a gap in between the two. Now the next box that a lot of beekeepers use, but some don't, is called a medium. It's also sometimes called an Illinois super or a Western super. It is 6 5/8 inches tall, so it's 3 inches shorter than your deep box, and it uses medium frames. The frames are the same length as the deep box, and some beekeepers will actually use all medium frames for their hives, but typically the Langstroth is a deep and a medium, and then the honey super, which is a shallow. So our shallows, like I said, are also known as a honey super. They are only 5 11/16 inches tall, and they use the most shallow frames that are used in a Langstroth Hive box. These really should only be used for honey. They're not tall enough to make any kind of a brood pattern in your hive, and I have some shallows, 1 or 2, but mostly I do my honey in a medium box on my Langstroth hives. So like I said, these boxes come in 8 and 10 frame sizes, meaning they either hold 8 or 10 frames. The frames are the same size. Just keep in mind the boxes are not compatible. Okay, so now we're really going to get to what I think is Langstroth's biggest contribution to beekeeping here in, well, not just the United States, but in the world. And that is the movable Langstroth frame. Keep in mind that I said earlier that today's modern Langstroth frames are not exactly the same dimension as the one that he created in the 1800s. However, the key features are still there, and that is primarily bee space. So let's look at the modern Langstroth hive frames. They have a 3/8 inch gap underneath to allow the bees to move under the frame. This design allows the hive boxes to be stacked on top of each other so that the bees can move vertically in the hive with ease. The way they were developed also kept them from making burr comb between the boxes, although bees will do what bees do, and occasionally they do that. When butted together, the little pieces on the frames allow for 3/8 inch space for the bees to move between the frames, which is something that top bar type frames that were used like in the Worry frame or Kenyan top bar hives did not allow to happen inside the hive. Now, Langstroth was not the first guy to develop the movable frame in beekeeping, but he was really the first to incorporate bee space in a way which allowed the frames to sit together and be stacked on top of each other in a modern hive box. So the modern Langstroth frame is generally made from wood. However, plastic frames are also an option. The plastic frames will last a long time. The cheaper variations of them will warp over time. So wood frames will come in 3 distinct options usually. So what you're going to see is the foundationless frame, and this is where the frame is left open for the bees to draw out the comb naturally without any kind of guidance. Some frames may have a starter strip, which is a small strip that is attached to the top bar to guide the bees in the production of comb. These strips can be made from wood, wax, or plastic. Now, originally in Langstroth's design, he used a small piece of wood which he cut. It was angled like a prism, and he connected it to the top bars of his hives to give the bees something to start on. But that was the kind of starter strip he used. But he did not have a full sheet of wax or do plastic. So some strips can be made, like I said, from wood, wax, or plastic. Some of them, the plastic ones, are 1 inch. It just gives the bees an idea of a starter area to build your frame from and to let them build vertically. Now, there are also, the final type of frame is called a frame with foundation. And this frame is usually completely made with a type of plastic that slides inside the frame. You can wire the frame and heat up the wires to allow a wax frame to sit on top, and then the wires will embed themselves in the frame. So again, either your frames in the Langstroth Hive are going to be foundationless, they're going to have a starter strip, or they're going to have a full sheet of foundation, whether it's plastic or wax foundation. Now, you can have different types of these frames in the hive. You can have some foundationless, some with foundation, some with a plastic foundation, and you can, a lot of guys will do one full foundation frame, one with a strip, or one without foundation to allow the bees to make comb. For a brood box, it doesn't matter whether you use a foundationless or not, but I think if you're going in your honey supers, it's advantageous to use full sheets of foundation, because as you spin those frames around to get that honey out, a frame that does not have foundation in it can sometimes fall apart. Keep in mind, just like hive boxes, your frames will come into 3 specific sizes. That's going to be deep, medium, and small. You can put a smaller frame into a deeper brood box. It's not optimum, but if you get short-handed, you can do that. However, you can't put a deep frame in a medium or a shallow box. That's pretty much why I've gone with only deep boxes and medium boxes for my honey supers. I don't use the shallow boxes anymore. I find that if I have to, in an emergency, put a medium frame in a deep box for them to produce a little bit of brood, it's viable. It's not optimum, but they can do it. The shallow frames for me are just not usable, but a lot of people do like the shallower frame. They are lighter to carry, but again, that's a matter of personal opinion. So after your brood box or your honey super, there is a small, thin top that goes on top of your hive. It's called the inner cover. Now, the inner cover sits on top of the uppermost box of the hive just before the outer cover. Now, the idea behind the inner cover is it's to prevent the bees from propolizing the outer cover to the hive. This is important as the outer cover has a lip that hangs down or telescopes over the outer edge of the top of the box. And this lip does not really allow you to get your hive tool under it to break the propolis seal. So if you don't have an inner cover and you put your telescoping outer cover on there and the bees propolize it, you go to try to rip that cover off, you can actually lift up your whole hive. And then by the time it breaks, the hive drops down. The bees get really, really upset with you. And it's not a good day. So the inner cover also has a small hole in the middle. Now, I've noticed that some of the ones I buy do not have hardware cloth covering that hole. I prefer to put hardware cloth on mine. This hole allows ventilation and moisture to escape from the bottom part of the hive up into the upper part of the hive. Now, I prefer to have this type of cover that has the hardware cloth on it, but if you don't, you can definitely buy the hardware cloth and put it on there yourself. Putting this hardware cloth on will help prevent the bees from entering that area inside the inner cover and the top of the telescoping cover, because they'll get in there and they'll make burr comb. You'll also note that on this inner cover that there is a small notch in the front of the hole. It's like a bee escape. If you don't cover that hole with some hardware cloth, it also gives your bees the potential another entrance area to get into and go down into the hive. Now, I know some beekeepers keep an upper entrance in their hives, but the problem is that I can see this would also allow robbers to get into your hive in times of a dearth. So if you have this sitting on top of your honey super and that smell of honey's in the air and they can smell it through that entrance, they'll go straight into that bee escape, right down into your hive, and start robbing your honey supers if there's no hardware cloth on it. So while the notch in the inner cover allows any bees that you're caught when you drop the telescoping cover on top of your box to escape, it's not one of my favorite things, and I usually block mine off with a small piece of wood, glue it in there, and cut it to fit. Like I said, the inner cover also acts as a small airspace that provides a small amount of insulation just by use of an air gap due to its thin plywood bottom, but this insulation value is minimum. Like I said, the primary use is to keep your bees from propylizing your telescoping outer cover onto your hive. So the last part of your hive that we're going to talk about is the very top of it, and that's going to be the outer cover. Now, most hives that you're going to see in the backyard beekeeper is going to have what is called a telescoping outer cover that I talked about when we were looking at the inner covers. So the telescoping outer cover sits on top of the inner cover, and it sits down over the sides as they slide down, and they telescope over the outer edge of the inner cover to prevent rain from entering the hive. They generally have a flat roof that is covered with a thin sheet of metal to protect the cover from the weather. The metal may be painted white or it may be unpainted. So there is a different kind of cover called a migratory cover. It is used primarily by commercial beekeepers, and that consists of just a piece of wood with two cleats on the end that sit down on the box. And the reason they use that is so that they can stack boxes together, put them on a pallet, and transfer them from like California, where they can pollinate the olives or the almond groves or the wineries, and it makes it easily transportable. Not really the best cover for the backyard beekeeper. The telescoping outer cover is pretty much the cover that most backyard beekeepers will use. And that's pretty much the components that you're going to see in the Langstroth Hive. Now, when you buy a basic beginner bee kit, you're not going to get all of these components. And one other component which I didn't talk about because it's not in the basic kits, and that's a slatted rack. And it is made just as it sounds. Now, the slatted rack is just a piece that can fit on top of the bottom board or over your screen bottom board, and it has slats in it which line up with the frames above it, and this usually gives the hive an extra 2 inches of space between the bottom of the frames and the screen bottom board. Now, this does allow the bees someplace to get out of the way when there's ventilation going on in the hive. If the hive is hot during the summer, they can go down there and move out of the way. Some people say it cuts down on bearding during hot days here in the South. I'll be honest with you, I don't use a slatted bottom rack. I can't give you an opinion on that. I'm sure there are several videos out there you can look at, and people say, yes, they love the slatted rack. Some they don't. But for the most part, I find that most beekeepers, especially in my club and in my general area, do not use a slatted rack. Well, that's it, nerds. That is the Langstroth Hive in its most basic form. Anyway, guys, I know I'm rambling. I'm trying to keep this video short, but like I said, leave a comment. Share this video with someone that you know that may be a new beekeeper. I'm going to be doing several videos in this new beekeeper series. The next video, we're going to be talking about bee suits, full suits, jackets, veil types, materials, what to look for, what I think about them. I'll put in what I use. And if you like it, share it with someone who's new. If you want to subscribe to the channel, go for it. It'll help you get updates. And I don't know that I really care about channel views so much as I just want to share my information and my knowledge with someone out there that may need it. So once again, nerds, this is Todd Gamble. apprentice level master beekeeper with the Texas Master Beekeepers Program. I'm out. Y'all be safe. See you until next time. We'll see you later. Bye.